Sure, just a few slides. So as I said, the IBA published a major report on this issue in May of this year, and there are copies outside if anyone is interested. When I speak on this, I always begin with some of the stories that we heard in response to our research, because although the numbers are shocking, I think it's very easy to be desensitized to numbers, and it's important to remember that behind those numbers are very challenging personal stories. So a male lawyer from the US talked of the partner that he worked with being profane and demeaning. He was relentless. He was proud that he treated people so badly. It was a badge of honour for him, and the law firm protected him. I suspect probably everyone in this room can think of someone they've worked with who, to a greater or lesser extent, exhibits similar characteristics. An in-house lawyer from Korea, I should have also mentioned some of the stories here refer to sexual violence and sexual harassment, so if anyone needs to leave the room at any time, I'd encourage you to do so if this causes any distress. After I was sexually assaulted, I feared that his rank and reputation made me vulnerable. My disgust at remembering the horrible event prevented me from reporting it to the Bar Association or police. He frequently harassed junior female colleagues. I should have stopped him. So those are just two of literally thousands of stories like that we heard when we undertook this survey. As I said, I think it's important to remember those stories and keep them front of mind when talking about these issues in the abstract. And I'm sure that probably everyone in this room either has experienced bullying or sexual harassment, has witnessed it, or has heard of it occurring and impacting colleagues. The impetus for this research was the ongoing gender inequality at the senior end of the profession. So in a number of jurisdictions, we've had gender parity for 30 years now. So in my home country of Australia, we've had 50% female, 50% male law students for at least 3 decades now. And so the passage of time should have led to this pyramid. We should have 50% male partners, 50% female partners at most firms. Now, there'll always be some clustering on either side, but the simple passage of time, 30 years of supply at entry level parity, should mean we now have parity at the top. And you go to any law firm website in Australia and you see that that isn't the case. And I'm sure that is reflected, our data shows that that's reflected in almost every country around the world. So we should have this pyramid, and instead we have a clustering of 10%, 20% female partners. Now the IBA wanted to find out why that was, and we did some research that indicated that sexual harassment and bullying were really problematic. And we're about to publish that research in 2017 when this happened. And I'm sure all of you at the time read about the Me Too movement, which began in New York and in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein, and spread all around the world and into almost every sector. So that was happening. There were a number of incidents that occurred in the legal profession, and yet when the IBA would speak to law firms and bar associations, we were still often told that this was a case of a few bad apples. This was not a structural, systemic problem. And so we wanted to find out. We undertook a major global survey of 7,000 lawyers from 135 countries. The survey was in 6 languages. I hope that perhaps some of the people in this room received the survey and undertook it. And the findings are, I think, fairly shocking. 1 in 2 female lawyers, 1 in 3 male lawyers have been bullied, 1 in 3 female lawyers, and 1 in 14 male lawyers have been sexually harassed. That was broadly similar across all regions of the globe and all types of legal workplaces. So this wasn't just law firms, this was in-house, this was government, this was advocates, this was the judiciary. Broadly speaking, there's some regional variation, but we have a problem. It would be nice to think this was a historical problem. We'd ask people about their all-time experience of these forms of conduct, so maybe this all happened 20 years ago. Sadly, that wasn't the case. 1/3 of bullying and 1/4 of sexual harassment had occurred within 12 months. We've already talked about what it looks like. We found that Bullying was predominantly supervision related. Sexual harassment spans a spectrum of both verbal and physical. As part of our subsequent work, we've been engaging heavily with younger members of the profession, and that's why we're really pleased to be having this panel here today, because our research shows that there's a significant disproportionate impact on younger members of the profession. So this relates to bullying. The data is pretty similar for sexual harassment. This is, have you been bullied within the past 12 months? And as you can see, age has a very significant relation to the experience of bullying. And the impact is huge. Firstly, people don't report this when they experience it. It affects their mental health. Sometimes they leave the profession, they leave their workplace. And that has an impact on the workplace, but I often think of the macro societal impact. We had an event about the report in Scotland in May, and the managing partner of the largest firm in Scotland was on the panel. And he spoke about how he had been bullied for the first 3 months of his training contract 30 years prior. And he'd gone home every day and crossed off the days until he could quit. And he was about to quit when the partner that was bullying him left for unrelated reasons. And this person who was being bullied went on 20 years later to become the managing partner of this major Scottish law firm. And I think how many people didn't get lucky and didn't have their bully or their harasser leave, and instead they left. How many star lawyers, how many managing partners, how many judges, how many in-house general counsel do we as a society globally not have because of these forms of conduct and their prevalence? Do we want to?
Kieran, just one question. When you said on the social level, this has also an economic impact. And I think the report mentions also for each law firm that if the numbers of, younger trainees or young associates and etc. leave, this gets to the law firm spending more money to train new ones. So this has an impact from an economic point of view.
Exactly. The churn and the brain drain from the profession is not a good thing. And there's significant data and research that shows that workplaces where bullying is prevalent, they're not happy workplaces. If you're being bullied, you're not going to be the best lawyer you can be, and so your productivity, your colleagues' productivity decreases. So, we say that there's very strong legal, moral and ethical reasons why collectively as a profession we have to act, but there's also a very simple business case.
And just, you can see the results on bullying and sexual harassment by country. What this map basically simply indicates how many people have, first of all, our law firms or those who have received the query have responded. So you can see America, Australia, and you can see that Europe is not that responsive in general.
Sure, so this map is only countries where we had a statistically significant sample to make sort of countrywide observations. So unfortunately, the survey was available in 6 languages, but they were all European languages. So we didn't have good data from the Middle East and from Asia, and that's unfortunate. And next time we do this, we will try to have better numbers. What this tells us, though, is the numbers were higher. So that's bullying, that's sexual harassment, were highest in Australia, the US, the UK, Canada, places where these issues are being talked about regularly, and there's a very open discussion about bullying and harassment. So what we would suggest is that doesn't mean Australia and New Zealand and Canada and US are better or worse necessarily, but people are more willing to attach these labels to their lived experiences.
And of course, I think it's related to differences in cultural norms as well, because sometimes cultural differences lead to a different perception and whether an act could be qualified as sexual harassment or bullying. So I even think that in the gray parts of unreported, first of all, these would be countries that they don't see sexual harassment and bullying as an issue, or that they would not consider acts of harassment or bullying as they are. They would not consider that this is actually something bad.
If I just add comments from Asian side, is that I have been an employment special lawyer for over 10 years and have conducted quite a number of investigations for companies, multinational companies with different cultures. And based on that, I agree with what she has said. There's really a cultural difference, and in Asia, especially, we have a fear of reporting incidences involving their boss, their superiors. So the numbers should not indicate the actuality of what is happening in these countries. And also, because of that culture, there could be some change. The changes could come at a much later stage in other countries than the countries like U.S. and Canada, which have been leading these cases. So that's my impression.
Samantha?
Well, yes, my practice and experience has been in the UK and Australia, where they've both scored very highly. But apart from a bit of touchiness about how high that score was in Australia, the reality is these are cases I'm dealing in. So I see the validity of this. In fact, although outside the legal profession, there was a story in the Australian news yesterday about a rugby team in an airport who were all wearing T-shirts that said rape and pillage. These are culturally, utterly unacceptable features, but people feel that they can behave in a way where they're not going to be picked up on this kind of openly sexually aggressive.
Yeah, so I would like to describe a very specific examples that actually I personally experienced, or a very common stories that I've heard while I'm working here in Korea. So I've worked as a in-house counsel for almost more than 10 years, and I've encountered various types of people, including management, regular staffs, and third parties, our customers, and so on and so forth. But I feel that I realized that we definitely have cultural differences regarding sexual harassment and bullying issues, and I don't think it is only limited in legal professional area. I think it's quite common things in other workplaces as well. But I'd like to point out one thing which is very clear, in my opinion, is that we are in changes. So as other panels already just mentioned, there are a lot of acts which is already enacted or being enacted. For example, Act on Equal Employment for both genders, or Act on Anti-Bullying at Workplaces, which is effective from this year in Korea. So I believe we are in the progress of changing. But still, we are fighting or having a lot of conflicts with against some cultures or practice in the past. So I'd like to tell you two points about that one. So I, as a in-house counsel, I personally have been involved in a lot of cases regarding disciplinary committee or HR committee integrating and resolving to decide what type of disciplinary measures to impose to perpetrator as for the sexual harassment or bullying. So while I'm taking care of those cases, I found something quite common statement from perpetrators, which was that the victim, normally the female, was a very close team member or colleagues, where their relationship was more like friendship, not just regular colleagues. So that means that certain specific verbal expressions or physical intimacies, touches, should be considered as should be acceptable in the perspective of reasonable common sense. So I found a lot of defenses from those perpetrators, and recently I encountered this case that this female, the victim, raised the issue to HR, the corporations, that she was humiliated by this guy. And then we found out she actually went to the police and tried to file a criminal case against him in the court. But it turns out that prosecutor decided not to indict this guy because the counter evidence was submitted by the perpetrator showing two people were sitting next to each other, and the victim was holding this guy's arm and smiling towards the camera at the year-end party. So, so this made prosecutor to perceive them as close colleagues in the first place. I understand why the prosecutor found this issue just like that, but in some way, I still have some questions not to be answered yet. So I'd like to ask you questions, including panels and folks in the hall. That have you ever found any issues just like this, or have you ever found some common defenses or statements from perpetrators? And I'm not sure this is a common phenomenon in global way, but I found many cases in here in Korea. So just like to ask you to share your thoughts on this issue like this type. And the second, I'd like to share the second stories with you, and this is one of this applies to me as well. So when what I felt as a sexist comment while I had worked with male leaders at workplace was their languages or statements with regard to marriage or motherhood. So including myself, I believe many single young female, especially professions, frequently had received questions such as, why are you not married yet up to that age? Or when are you going to get married and have a child? And or even
I understand you.
I know this could be a very extreme case, but I just like to share my personal experiences. So sometimes I even get questions, how is your dating going? So following those inquiries, I also had to listen unwanted advices, like about why women need to get married and to be a mother, and some of these old generations have a very strong belief that marriage is very important to personal life, right? And then being a mother or being a parent is one of the most crucial, important factors for a person's life. So I understand their personal belief, but I'm not sure it is a proper one to ask those questions in workplace. So whenever I encountered their counseling, I started to feel like I might be lack of something that every woman should have obtained for to play her parts. So I guess regardless how listeners feel like the marriage or even romantic relationships of youngsters used to be an interesting topic, it's easily and lightly being treated in the conversation between male leaders at lunch, tea time, or even company get together. So this could be a very extreme case. I don't believe it happens every day in your countries or in your jurisdictions. But I just like to know your thoughts or your experiences. And as I said, we are in the changing. So I do not find those cases anymore as much as often compared to past. But I think we still do have those cases, which is still ongoing, and still a lot of young females, especially. I don't want to limit that these happens to only to females, but it happens still, and then a lot of victims are being humiliated and have some sufferings from those comments and activities. So these are 2 points that I like to share, and then so hopefully there will be some free discussions among us. Thank you very much.
Before taking more maybe personal experiences from the speakers, please, the public, can you help us?
This is very embarrassing to say, but unfortunately in countries like Mexico, and I think it happens not in all the countries hopefully, but in many countries, that's the norm. And the norm is to even blame the victim. And that's grotesque, but you even blame the victim, and the first thing you ask is, are you sure you were harassed? But sure, or did you provoke it?
Right. And we come back to the perception. What is this?
What did you do?
What did you do?
For you to be harassed? Because you did something. So you become like you're becoming re-victimized. So it's a very hard situation, because first one, it's cultural, that you need to change that overall cultural perception of both public opinion and the authorities to start changing on the legal profession as well. So that's challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I understand there is a gray area, right? We do have a line between sexual harassment and non-sexual harassment, but the line itself is quite, I would say, fine line.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's purely subjective.
yes. So
That's the issue.
the requirement of harassment or requirement of criminal actions is actually based on victims' feeling and how victims feel about that. So I think that's why the prosecutor, which was my first story, decides that there are victims actually was not being sexually humiliated, based on their relationship. All those photos actually, which shows to their relationships. So I agree with your points, and this is very, very subjective issues.
I mean, if I just intervene a little bit, is that it will be very, very difficult practically to eradicate all these instances. But what's interesting about Korean law and how we are moving on is that under the law, we have specified certain procedures we have to keep. The we here means the employers have to keep. For example, they have to separate the victim from perpetrator straight away upon the request of the victim. And all other measures must be taken during the investigation and after the investigation when such an incident has been found in the end. And also there is a criminal punishment for retaliation against the victims and anyone who reported such incidences. So, I mean, from the legal perspective, there are of course the limits, but I think procedure matters are very important to keep the victims in either cases to not get humiliated further. And other than that, there should be also cultural things to be done, the personal matters, and how as a society can move on for the future to eradicate these instances. So if I just add my comments, it's like that.
Just to add here, I think it's interesting that the discussion is still around grey areas. It's language we're familiar with, and I think it plays to this issue of proof. Which you just raised, the victim being blamed immediately for typically her conduct, something that must have provoked it. And one of the challenges with sexual harassment cases is always the worst of the offending behaviour typically happens between two people when no one else is around and is always denied, in my experience. Now, the question about whether these are really grey areas or just deniable situations is perhaps what we need to focus on. And I would say actually that there really aren't grey areas, that someone's intention when they are making a move on someone sexually is deliberate, but because of the difficulties in proving sexual harassment and actually moving it immediately to a very legalistic sphere where, because it's a serious offence, because if someone were to be guilty of that or liable in a civil context or in their workplace, there's almost an unwillingness to find it, which places the victim or the target in a very difficult position. That's something that I come up against all the time in the cases that I'm dealing with, and unfortunately, as the lawyer, you do immediately turn to proof. What else is going to prove this? Because the expectation is it's going to be denied. Is there anything else around it? Are there text messages? Were there other people there? Is there a pattern of treatment? But in the real world, perhaps we could start off by working out that there really aren't any grey areas. I remember when some of these stories were coming up on the news, and friends were talking to me about their cases. A gay friend of mine said, "I never accidentally find my hand on someone's bottom. That doesn't happen." And I'm pretty confident that I've never found myself accidentally touching my male colleagues in a place that they would find uncomfortable. These aren't grey areas at all. I know we're going to talk about some means of tackling these issues. I know that there was in the UK, after the Kevin Spacey allegations came out, some work done in the Royal Court Theatre there, which was called No Grey Areas. Because what they did was, with the working community, not all of whom were employees, but people who worked in and around the theatre, was work their way through the situations where people had encountered sexual harassment, from the low end of the scale to the more serious sexual violence, to come up with some quite specific rules so that there wasn't a question about what was a grey area anymore. Perhaps that's something that could be looked at.
I have a question for the whole panel, but particularly for Mr. Lee. In situations where you have bullying harassment and you have, whether it be internal company policies or laws that require you to separate the victim and the perpetrator, and acknowledging that often the perpetrator is in a position of power, do you find that the victim is often, removed and to their detriment? For example, removed from a practice area, a team that they work in, where their partner has, sexually harassed them or bullied them, and then they're moved into a different area and their career is then stunted? Is that something that you find in each of the jurisdictions, that the victim is inherently, because of any kind of removal from the situation, which is supposed to be to their benefit, they're not actually benefited in a career sense?
I mean, the reason the law came in, not just leading to the company policies, I think as a society we felt that those things are happening and we are losing talents. Not just females, but also the younger generation. Because those generations will just leave the company, even if they can be a very great person for their company. So we, as a society, had that kind of cultures, and I think we still have it. And just implementing a new law does not change much. But what I just mentioned of these things was that by having these procedures as a law, and now employers are taking these very seriously, because if they just violate the procedures, they are just violating a law. So actually, as an outside legal counsel, we have all of the investigation, and during the investigation, actually the victim is being protected, and those perpetrators being removed from position temporarily at least, and sometimes given the garden leave, so that at least victims' initial right can be preserved for their benefits. So I think it's a good progress we're making, but of course we have to see how it will be affecting the country as a whole, because it's just begun. But we think we can make some updates and see how trends are beginning to change. Thank you.
So I'd like to one thing add in very short manner. What we are doing in practice is that once some sexual harassment issues is raised up, as I experienced, then this victim raised the issue and asked corporations to separate him or her from the mingle points of two people. So what we did was we request this guy, the perpetrator, to leave the office for a while, and then he can work at his home remotely, so that the victim do not have to encounter this perpetrator at the workplace anymore. So that's a very simple example as a treatment of what we did based on our regulations.
And I'm seeing that happen in practice now as well. So there's a new category of casework that I'm dealing with over the last year or two, which is men who've been falsely accused of harassment. This wasn't a significant part of my caseload before, but there are people who are turning to me for advice because they've been suspended because of an allegation. And so I'd say from my own personal experience, I'm seeing a shift.
If I just add one more point, because I was being pointed out as to speak, is that as a law firm, as an independent third party of the company, we are beginning to have more and more investigation on behalf of the company, because the company is beginning to feel that it may be not fair or not objective to internally progress the matter, because they are not unbalanced between the powers between two parties. So I think that is also a good sign, not just good for the business of us, but for those victims as well.
And thank you for the question, actually, because we have slightly, we return the focus on the fact that this happens in the legal profession too. Because, I mean, harassment and bullying's been on as issues for many years, but the report aims to disclose that this happens in the legal profession, notwithstanding it's law firm or in the judicial or whatever, and we are supposed, legal, people practicing law, we are supposed to be, the example of people with good moral character. And it turns out that it's here, and it's up to us to figure out what kind of, training and policies to implement. And the report says that, basically the senior lawyers and partners would know if there are, any kind of policies implemented in the law firms, whereas the younger ones, who are actually more as a percentage being, reported as victims, they would not even know that such trainings and policies are implemented in the law firms.
And just to provide you with some samples about Brazil, before giving the word to Kieran, that will provide us with some recommendations on how to avoid situations. As Veronica told us, this is very serious, because we are the lawyers, we are always providing and assisting our clients with the legal provisions about on how to avoid these situations, and this case keep on happening inside our houses. In Brazil, there are 3 examples that I can share with you, without giving any names for sure, but one of them, it's very recent, maybe 2-3 years ago. A trainee just killed himself because of bullying from the boss, and also stress, returning to the first panel of this day, and left a letter after the death. Said, oh, my boss was doing like this, I were overworking every day and pushing me seriously. This is very serious. In another case, a gay senior partner of one of the biggest Brazilian law firms was flirting with some boys, some young lawyers, male in this case, every time they are going to the printer to get copies. In such a manner that the trainees started to being, scared to get the copies, and was complaining with the personal department to change the chairs, change the desk of the place to be near to another printer. This is another example, and the last one that I can remember, it was something like 10 years ago in Brazil. A female, in this case trainee, jumped out the window of the office because she was sexually harassed by the boss. And these 3 examples came from 3 of them from the 5 top law firms in Brazil. And I'm very sure that you have examples in all of your countries, everywhere in the world, and most of them, when you go through the investigation, they just tell, no, this is for another reason, no, this is not true, no, the boss didn't did anything, the trainee was crazy, the trainee was with a misunderstanding and blah blah blah. But the fact is that this happens. And maybe we can close the session with some more slides from Kieran, provide the advice on how to avoid it, no?
I mean, this has been a somewhat pessimistic discussion, but I think this is the first step, or a step. The IBA report articulates 10 recommendations that are aimed both at individuals, at workplaces, at regulators, at bars, at law societies. And that change has to begin with us. So whenever I present to a room, I say, I suspect no one here thinks they're a bully or a sexual harasser. I certainly hope that no one thinks that of me. I have a colleague and someone who I used to supervise in the room, Tom. I hope I never bullied you. But we all should reflect on our own behaviour. Do we do enough to call this out when we see it? Do we stand up for those who experience it and support them? Are we inadvertently enabling other people to commit this conduct? Or are we actually acting in a way that isn't appropriate? That's not an easy internal conversation to have, but I think it's important that all of us have that conversation. More needs to be done in the workplace. There's not enough policies and training. We need to be talking about this. This is the first step. Having this conversation is the first step in achieving change. So to that end, the IBA, following the publication of this report, has set out on our largest ever campaign on a single issue. Seoul is the 16th city that we've been in this year, and having events such as this, we've had an event with the Korean bar that Jung-woo kindly spoke at earlier this week. We've had events in Latin America, in Europe, in North America, in Australia, and later this year we have some events in Asia and in Africa. And for each of those recommendations, the IBA has articulated things that we will do, concrete steps that we will take to try and lead by example on these issues. As I said, that change starts with us, and we have to think about how we can empower people to speak up. There's this generational divide that we've discussed and touched on quite a lot today, and there's a real backlash to Me Too and these issues. And I think the archetype of that is, I've spoken to a lot of older male partners who say, Kieran, I'm afraid, I'm nervous, I don't know what I can say or do anymore, I'm worried about being reported for something. And so the consequence is they're not comfortable around their younger female colleagues, they're not willing to mentor them, for example. And my first reaction to that was, well, just don't sexually harass them and you don't have a problem. But then I realised that actually the fear they have is genuine. We may not agree with it, but they are genuinely concerned because there's been this sort of social flux. Now, none of this was ever okay, but there has been social change and people are concerned. And if we don't engage with that concern productively and provide a safe space to talk about these issues, we're all going to lose out. Which is why it's so important to maintain momentum on these issues. So the report begins with a story from 1983, when a major US law firm held a swimsuit competition for their young female interns. And the winner of the competition was given a graduate job with the firm. And a partner said to the Wall Street Journal, no less, she has the body we'd like to see more of. And there was controversy at the time. And in the 90s, a big London law firm sent a junior lawyer to a strip club with clients. I'm sure in all of your jurisdictions, there have been moments like this. We've had Me Too before. We had it in the 80s, we had it in the 90s, we had it in the 2000s. None of this is new. Now, the current movement has given us this momentum, but what is so important is that we capitalise on it, and we don't let it dissipate such that we hear again in 20 years' time talking about the same issues. So to that end, I'm very sorry, I have to leave now to get to a meeting because we've run slightly over time. I think the panel might be happy to take questions. Samantha particularly has worked with me on this and is very expert on the IBA's work, so as happily can answer questions. But I want to end with this quote. As I said, we had thousands of quotes from around the world, stories we were told, but I thought this one, in 2 sentences, encapsulates what took me in the report 130 pages to say, which is that there's just no place in this profession, nor any other, for bullies or sexual harassers. At the very least, people deserve dignity and a safe, supportive environment in return for their work. So thank you very much. Thank you to Bruno for moderating this panel. I don't want to interrupt questions because I'm sure people have things to say. Unfortunately, I need to get to another meeting.
No, but there's no problem, Kieran. Thank you so much. And actually, we are running out of time. Actually, we exceeded a lot. I want to thank you, everybody, all the survivors of this day, and also for the panelists that we prepared so well for all your time doing our conference calls and all the time today. We will be very happy to take your questions during the reception that we will have now. But before that, I want to introduce you to the vice chair of our committee, that's Marco Monaco, that want to have a closing remark for our event today.
Hello everybody, just a few words. Apologize, but the chair and the vice chair, unfortunately, this afternoon I just arrived from the airport. Thanks very much to all my colleagues, to the officers, and to the speakers, and for all of you, because the trainings are one of the most important activities of our Young Lawyers Committee. We started a few years ago. We expand the topics, the issues for these new, very interesting topics, not only the legal career, M&A transactions, litigation arbitration, but for example, artificial intelligence, robotics, building a sexual harassment has been very interesting. We are just giving a quick look to the list and to the program of this training. We have speakers and panelists in general from more than 12 jurisdictions. This helps to share the knowledge and be updated year after year. We have just planned other trainings in Lebanon and Brazil in the next months. So welcome to this annual conference, and please be with us during this week, especially tomorrow morning for an introductory session, as Rainer said before, and because it's a very good occasion to expand, to know each other, to share knowledge about our jurisdictions, legal development, rule of law, and legal career. So just 3 minutes has been enough because it's 4:30 and we are all tired, and thanks again to all, to Erika, to Veronica, to Bruno, to Philippe, to Nasser, and to other, and to all panelists, okay? Thanks a lot.
Thank you again, and please join us at the reception now.
Mañana me voy. Tal vez alcance a ir a la DMC, a la zona de militarizada, no sé. Tengo muchas ganas de ir.
¿Y cuándo viniste?
Oh, sorry. Llegué el jueves en la